through our spiritual experience, through particularly the psychedelic interactions, what we find is that people are less focused on the me aspect of the ego, right? The what do I want? How do I feel? What am I going to do, right? Like what is best for me? Sort of this selfish desire aspect. Often what happens when people go through these experiences is they're less focused on the selfish aspects of self, and instead much more focused on how I can be more valuable to the collective whole.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Set and Setting. Today, our guest is Shasta Winn. Shasta is a Saba Cooperative DAO member, solarpunk storyteller, content creator, and community incubator who also supports individuals and communities as a group facilitator and counselor. She's a credentialed therapist and educator with a Master's of Art, with an MA in psychology and counseling, who over the past 15 years has studied consciousness, world spiritual practices, and sustainable communities, and has been assisting individuals and groups with issues related to co-occurring addictions, trauma, and other issues, as well as dispute resolution and mediation. She's passionate about socially building and networking healthy communities, permaculture, and nomadic life, as well as mystical pursuits, sound therapy, meditation, music, and shamanic-type practices. Wow. So I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have a lot of passions.
Nomadic life that's not even all of them. Yeah, totally. I'm really impressed with sort of like the mashup of everything here. The nomadic life in particular really speaks to me just because I feel like so many of us are all over the place at this point, and, post-COVID world, just remote working and all of that. So maybe we can get into that a little bit later. But do you want to just kind of go over, your background, how you got here? What are you up to these days exactly?
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's a story. I guess how I got here starts young, as far as I feel like I've been a lifelong mystic in a way. And there's lots of ways I think that people look at that word, but for me, I've been a seeker, right? In certain aspects, and a seeker of knowledge when it came to what I could learn from philosophy, from religion, from just spiritual practices in general, but also a seeker of the information that comes from in ways that are not about the book learning or not about learning from another human being. And so I was in that young in my life, and then I found my own ways through it, the exploring, and it definitely led me in the direction of psychology, right? Like trying to understand the mind, trying to understand consciousness. And I ended up going to a grad school that really allowed me to explore my own really passions. I went to a low residency school that was a progressive school. It allowed me to design my own education in a way. And so I really was able to delve into this like really deeply. And so career-wise, I went from an undergrad in social work, working with women and children in homeless transitional living program that had addictions, doing their addiction treatment, and numerous halfway houses and methadone treatment programs, intensive outpatient for adults, adolescents. Like I was doing so much, because I always just wanted to help people, like that was just the drive that I always had, was to help people. I think I came from a really difficult background myself. And, I always kind of saw that there was a lot of opportunity to help. So I wanted to be there to help. And I was just trying to figure out what were the best ways, right? So got the degree, undergrad in social work, and then the psychology degrees and the clinicians like licensing, and got into the field of my own practice, my own halfway house, doing all of that. But realizing as I'm involved with it that there were aspects to the work that I just didn't feel were working, you know. And with the population that I was working with, people that were co-occurring addictions and trauma, like this is a really difficult population with a lot of suffering and a lot of high risk behaviors. And I was in a situation where I would have people that were coming to me looking for help, like legitimately like desperate for help, and feeling like I knew of certain tools that could help them, but because of licensing boards and things like that, professional restrictions, I couldn't even recommend these things without being at risk, of consequences. So there was this feeling of being stuck, in a way where I really wanted to help people, but there was like these barriers to being able to. So I ended up leaving the clinical field altogether, feeling like I was more aligned with my ethics to just keep finding ways to help people versus just do what was sort of expected of me in that role. Because what was happening is I was watching people die, like people that I cared about. And so I couldn't just sit there and do that. And so it became, all right, what can I do? And I've spent time in Jamaica, I've spent time in Mexico. I've gone and done it in places that, aren't going to put me at risk. But at the same time, like not everybody can go to these other countries, and not everybody has that luxury, particularly people that are struggling with addictions and trauma. Most of the time, they don't have much money at all. So I wanted to be able to provide low cost, donation-based service for people to be able to really get access to it. And psilocybin was my medicine of choice. It aligned with me more so than I aligned with N. I think that's the way it is for a lot of mystics with most of our tools. But yeah, I did my own journeying in a 40-day hermitage, where I did increasingly every 3 days, higher and higher doses, just to really get my own experience and in complete isolation without distraction of anything. So that was extremely transformative going through that journey. And when I left the career, the clinical career, I was in the assumption that I wasn't going to go back. Like I was sort of done with the clinical world. I was going to just sort of follow that path of helping people and doing whatever I could with the time I had available to help. And what ended up happening, surprisingly, is I realized in Oregon, like I knew in Oregon what was happening with them rolling out the mushrooms and being able to access them therapeutically. But when I moved here, it was my assumption that only licensed clinicians would be able to have access to being involved with this. It was just, there was just the way that things were going. It just seemed like that was what was going to happen, is that it was going to be medicalized in a way, and that it was just going to be, done in the way that it has been done in research. And just a month ago, I learned that when they wrote the regulations, they said that you don't have to have clinical licensure to like head these programs. And so I was shocked, realizing that like I have the ability to write the training program curriculum. Like I looked at what the regulations were, what they were asking for, which they seemed really agreeable, like the different things that are included as far as what are skills necessary to be a good facilitator. And so I wrote a curriculum, and it has an online course component, and it has an in-person residency component, a practicum component. It's 160 hours long. But it met the Oregon health approval, and I am now having the ability to run these programs, which is awesome. It's super exciting.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. As you're speaking, I have so many questions and I was just writing them down. So, to start, can you, just for the audience who like doesn't necessarily know what's going on in Oregon, can you explain, like, Oregon now has a therapeutic psilocybin program. There's like state approved, curricula for people to train to hold space for psilocybin. Like, can you explain that? And also, why was, when you're talking about all these things that you wish you could have suggested to people you were working with before, like now that it's a more open conversation, like how does psilocybin really fit into the work that you've been doing or were previously doing that now you can have more freedom and flexibility to talk about?
Sure, yeah. Well, realizing that often what would happen when working with people in a counseling setting is, first of all, there's a lot of pressure on the counselor, to come up with the right approach to fixing the problem, to navigating the experience in a way that's really going to assist the person. And I think maybe as a clinician, maybe I got caught up on that, the sense of responsibility or the sense of ownership of another person's therapeutic journey, that it was on me. And so there was a lot of energy and effort that I was putting into trying to create these people's, therapeutic experience, and feeling a lot of pressure around that. And with this knowledge that these sacred plant medicines that have been used for thousands of years have been found to really be transformative in very short durations, whether it be a single experience, if it's really integrated well, or, a number of experiences that are really profound for people can drastically shift their lives. And I wasn't necessarily seeing that in the normal clinical world. It was like, even when people would get sober, they would often be just struggling every day not to use. And maybe people were proud of them because they were functioning in society, but they weren't happy. They weren't thriving. And the only time I really felt like I saw people who drastically changed, who were starting to thrive in some sort of way, it's because they had a spiritual experience, some kind of spiritual experience, whether it be from some sort of religious beliefs or a near-death experience, or using psychedelics or something that transformed them because of the numinous quality of it. And that's really what got me thinking about the ways that I want to align with creating those opportunities for spiritual experience with people. And so, yeah, obviously, we've known for thousands of years that these certain plant medicines or fungus medicines are helpful for creating these spiritual experiences. And I really do. I feel like that's what makes people thrive. But you're right. It's like it was such a difficult thing to even talk about, because if you were in the clinical world, just to mention it, you're running, that you're vulnerable in different ways professionally. So I, even leaving the profession, I was still very cautious about talking about it or whatever. But yeah, with Oregon now, it's quite interesting, because they decided that they were going to pass for it to be therapeutically available for people. So the voters agreed. And what they want to do is they want to create these service centers, licensed service centers, that are controlled spaces, controlled therapeutic spaces, with the licensed therapeutic cultivation of the mushrooms to make sure that they're very high quality, no contamination, and training facilitators in the skills necessary to be therapeutic trip sitters, right? Like really capable of helping the person navigate, holding the space, making sure it's safe, making sure that appropriate boundaries are being held, just all that stuff. And yeah, so it's really cool to think that the state is doing it, and it seems like they're doing it in a really responsible way too, because obviously, if all of a sudden they just legalized it, and put it in dispensaries and everyone could just go out and get mushrooms and use them, there's a high likelihood that people would have really big experiences in like small public places. And we don't want that to happen, because that would really frighten people and could end up leading to a pushback that prevents us from being able to continue doing this. So I like the way that Oregon has decided to do it in a very controlled way. And that's not really me, because I'm not really like a let's control things type person. But the fact that they're trying to make it so that it is a very a sacred space being created for this, with responsibly trained people involved with doing it, so that it gets that support from people. They're able to see how it can be done really well, so that hopefully the other states will start opening up and allowing it as well. So yeah.
So, okay, I have so many questions. Every time you say something, I just keep getting more and more like ideas going off in my head. So two things that are kind of piggybacking off of each other. Number one is you describe yourself as a mystic. So what does that really mean to you? And then when you talk about how people who are kind of having success in, in therapy, that they're having a spiritual experience, right? Like what does it mean to have a spiritual experience? And then how do you harness that experience and allow it to then positively impact your life going forward?
Sure, yeah. So the definition of mystic, and I don't think I can say it exactly, but it's really the people who strive to attain information through contemplation and self-surrender, and who are seeking access to knowledge that is beyond the senses. Right. And I like the way that kind of explains it, because there's no specific religious connotation with it, but it's more than just maybe some of that very vague spiritual that exists at this point, where maybe now anybody who does yoga or is vegan or whatever, like, considers themselves spiritual in some sort of way. But a mystic is that person that is seeking to access something that they believe is a greater all, whether that be some sort of higher power source, the collective consciousness, whatever it is. And most mystics can't even define it and won't try to because it's so big and huge in a way, and they just understand you can't grasp the full complexity of it, but you can seek to continue to grasp pieces of it. And the path of the mystic is continuing to follow the breadcrumbs in a way. So yeah. And when I talk about spiritual experiences or numinous experiences, it's like having those profound aha moments that come through either making some sort of connection with then and now, from getting some sort of message or inspiration, the synchronicities, the right time, right place. But near death experiences, I think people recognize what those things have been reported to be like, or like psychedelic journeys. Often what it is a person being maybe confronted with their challenges in certain ways, right? Like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It really is a challenging thing, where the things that you might be struggling with, in order to get yourself in alignment with who you really want to be, can end up showing itself to you during these journeys and giving you insights into how you maybe came to be that way, as well as ways that you can move forward to be more in alignment. And so for whatever reason, the symbolic aspects of the things that happen during a journey, they really trigger something in the person that makes them feel aligned with a different way of thinking when they come back out and through. And a big piece of it is the integration, obviously, to be able to apply that understanding or those thoughts into day-to-day life beyond that. But yeah, for a lot of people, it ends up really making a huge difference when they have these spiritual experiences, for really flipping something or changing something in the way that they think.
And, I guess when you talk about a mystic kind of like going beyond the senses, I mean, a spiritual experience, and maybe you want to corroborate this or just expand, is like when your soul is like really what takes precedence as the primary experience, like the way that you're relating to the world through like that place of soul, rather than mind and, like body being the container for the soul. But like ultimately it's not even just about the physical, I don't know, I'm just trying to like, I ask myself this question too, because it's such a central question in my life, is like, how can I get most aligned with what my soul wants, if like the soul is kind of a piece of, your inner divinity, and how does that direct you?
Right. We have all these words, right? So we've got mind, soul, spirit, right? Body, ego, right? Like, and it's kind of figuring out like where is this? Like, where are these different pieces? Where do they exist, and how do I interact with them? Are there overlaps? Like, is a soul a spirit? Is a spirit a soul? And I think we could probably find all different opinions on those things. I've read a lot of different books with different people who have opinions. I tend to look at it more in the sense of the ego self right? Versus the self that is unified and aligned with the collective all, right? So, and the difference between sitting in one mind versus sitting in the other, and short of just experiencing full ego death, you can't just sit there forever. You always come back to ego experience. But I think that we can, through our spiritual experiences, through particularly the psychedelic interactions, what we find is that people are less focused on the me aspect of the ego, right? The what do I want? How do I feel? What am I going to do, right? Like what is best for me? Sort of this selfish desire aspect. Often what happens when people go through these experiences is they're less focused on the selfish aspects of self, and instead much more focused on how I can be more valuable to the collective whole, how I can heal myself so that I can be more valuable to the collective whole. It just seems to be pretty consistent with mystical experiences across the board, right?
So what can you do, like, after you've had maybe an acute mystical experience, to really harness it and enable it to kind of integrate into your mundane life? Like, what are certain practices, embodied practices, or ways of being or mindfulness that can just like allow it, like give it some runway?
What I found to be probably the most valuable to me has been journaling, just because it's really helpful to just get your thoughts out regularly, to be able to explore your thinking, to be able to reflect back on them. Also, just taking the time to write. It really involves a process of communication with yourself, as well as communication with your higher power of some sort. By doing that, like even writing out prayers sometimes can be even more valuable than just speaking them, because of the fact that we're writing. So journaling totally about your experiences and what it brings up for you, as well as there's certain ways that we can use art, right? So different ways of painting or designing or collages, or ways that we can express our inner feelings into this physical reality by placing it on there. And that can be even like vision boards and stuff too, because sometimes we get insights during these spiritual experiences that motivate us towards doing certain things. But being able to have a visual representation of what we're trying to work towards can really help in the integration of it. And then, sometimes journeying, like I said, it can bring up difficult things that we need to face. And so sometimes things that maybe have been suppressed for a period of time that people have been refusing to look at will come up to the surface to them emotionally. So afterwards, for some people, there can be a more difficult time where they're trying to deal with the emotions of something real that they've been suppressing, but that they need to deal with in order to heal from it. So with things like that, like somatic experiencing type activities, I really love like ecstatic dance and like 5 rhythms, like the movement of allowing your body to flow with music can really be very expressive and releasing of the different emotions and traumas in the body. So it really depends on each person as far as what is the different tools that are best for them. But those are go-tos with me. Tarot is a huge one too. I feel like the symbolic and archetypal imagery in cards can be a really valuable tool, just like therapeutically when working with people too. Not necessarily to do readings for them, but to offer it to be something to contemplate on, and it will trigger all sorts of different thoughts and conversations, which is great for the integration processing.
Wow, I've never heard tarot as integration, but that makes so much sense. So you talked about building out a curriculum, right? And so, with regard to psilocybin and space holding, correct? So what does that curriculum entail, and how can a curriculum also honor all of these more spiritual aspects that we're talking about?
I think it's because at least in the way that it was outlined and structured and the way that I designed the curriculum, is that it's really not giving any specifics on how to do this. It's really giving the structure on the best practices associated with certain aspects of doing this. So it's basically like we can all agree to certain things about the way that we do our practice to the most extent. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but there's certain pieces of it that are pretty consistent across the board, so we talk about preparation, right? There's set and setting, intention setting, and just screening for appropriateness, and all that stuff is all part of, it should be part of everybody's sort of exploration when it comes to these things, is having that initial opportunity to really decide or set some intention for what's happening. And then beyond that, you're talking about the different sort of boundaries around the appropriate relationship between a facilitator and a client, right? Like what is appropriate, what's inappropriate, like how are you acting with them, as in the sense of like building rapport, right? And effective communication skills, and not being interjecting your own thoughts or opinions into another person's goals or into their life. Like that's all pretty consistent, as well as, yeah, the boundaries around, like not having inappropriate touch or all of that is all part of the administration. But then there's like the basic stuff like music, and the fact that music is so important to the journey, and looking at the different aspects of why that is. Not saying what type of music, right? So like you could come from any culture and utilize any particular style of music to do the journeying, but the fact that music is extremely important, or breathing and breath work, like that's all extremely important regardless of what tradition you're coming from. And yeah, integration, the after consultations around it, it's all consistent, no matter where you're coming from. So there's a lot of cultural equity stuff involved in the curriculum too. There's 12 hours of, sorry, excuse me. There's 12 hours of cultural equity, like cultural competency type stuff included in it too. So really being able to understand and respect that we all come from very unique experiences, and that we should be curious and interested about each other's uniqueness. And that's sort of the opposite, right? Where we, maybe some of us that are older have come from a generation where it was like, we're all the same, like we're all the same, we're all one, we're all just human beings. And there is sort of this new approach to looking at cultural equity where it is like, no, but we're not. I mean, we are all one in that greater mystical way, but we are all very culturally unique too. And we really need to acknowledge that. And we need to bring that up in our discussions with each other. And we need to recognize that when we're interacting with each other. And particularly when it comes to certain marginalized communities or things like that, we need to take that into consideration, particularly as counselors or facilitators when we're interacting with them, like how their culture has impacted them. So that's a huge part of the curriculum as well. So like those pieces are all extremely valuable. The one thing that I did find challenging though about the state and the curriculum and the expectations associated with the licensing is they do require that facilitators all do so completely sober. And traditionally, that's not always the case, right? That often journeying is done with the guide, also under the influence of the mushroom, and with the belief that it's actually the mushroom communicating through the guide that does a lot of the effective work during the journey. And I personally have felt like that was the most valuable way to do it myself with people, and was on a lower dose with them, where I was, much more capable of maintaining the space. But at the same time, I was riding the wave with them, and I was able to feel, in a way, certain aspects of what they were feeling because I was there with them. And so with the state, there is this requirement that, and I get it, for responsibility's sake and boundaries and all that, that facilitators need to be sober. And so there is that challenge, right? About that means that, yes, they're going to be great, for holding the space and helping and doing the therapeutic trip setting. But some of those valuable aspects of being a guide might be missing. They can kind of guess what to put on for music, but they're not going to be able to feel it, right? So we've been brainstorming around what that might look like here, because there's no restriction on who can go into a service center. Like you don't have to have any particular condition or goal in mind. Like it could just be to be more creative or more spiritual. So the idea is we could have the licensed facilitators who are there, holding the space, doing so sober, as well as we can have sort of an advanced certification in a way for people who are facilitators, but also have deep experience with the mushroom, right? Of guiding people in the mushroom, and that those people could actually also go into journeys as guests, right? And they're not required to be responsible for holding the space or doing all the paperwork or, like that. They're just responsible for helping to influence the journey music-wise, therapeutic-wise, based on what the mushroom is giving them, So I think that, I don't know if other people are talking about this possibility. It's definitely something we've been brainstorming, because I don't want to miss that piece. And I think that it's really, really important. So kind of long story short, like that's a little bit of an overview of the curriculum. And it includes 60 hours online, 60 hours in an in-person residency, which can be 7 or 10 days, depending on if you want to do full day intensive or half day. But it's like all on site, which I love those. I really do. I love those like week long, just like morning till night, like intensive, immersive group stuff. And for something like this, I feel like there's no other way I would want to do it, because it's not just about learning how to be a facilitator. It's about like the intense work that you have to do to actually be ready to be a facilitator. So going through the online course, there's a lot of like essays and things that have people exploring their own stuff. But I think it's going to be during the residencies where people are really going to get challenged to look at their self and the ways that they are vulnerable. Because with mushrooms, you can't necessarily fake who you are around somebody who's tripping. Like they tend to see you with different eyes. So if you haven't done your work, if you have your own stuff that's there in the journey with you, like the person that you're guiding is going to see it, and it's going to possibly impact their journey. So we want to make sure that the people who are finding themselves in these positions are really doing the work, where they're going to be able to be in that spot and be helpful to the person without compromising it.
What are the ways that someone who hasn't done their work or isn't working on themselves concurrently with also serving medicine or whatever, how could that negatively impact a participant?
I think a person under the influence of mushrooms is so sensitive to everything in a way that even just facial expressions of a person, they can look really evil. And if a person is struggling internally with like negative thoughts, or maybe has a negative opinion of the person that they're interacting with, and they're actually like trying to hide it, whatever, because they're getting paid, or they're motivated only by the money, they're all this stuff that somebody might not necessarily realize because they're really good at acting. But if they go into a journey with a person, that all of a sudden there's like the scales fall off the eyes, right, in a way. And now it's like, oh, wait, you're not looking like I thought you were. Like now there's something dark about you. And yes, if the person that you're supposed to trust to be there to help you through this journey, all of a sudden you're looking and it's like, oh, but wait, there's something really dark about you. So we got to work on our darkness. We got to work through all the things that might compromise us and make people look like, oh, yikes. And not to mean that we need to be perfect, but that we need to be really working on our stuff and owning it, and looking at the ways that we're vulnerable to falling into selfish ego ways, or just the ways that we fall into fear. That's another thing. I've seen situations where, it's almost like people get like demon faced when they're afraid. So there's different things that can happen.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, obviously at worst you hear these horrible stories about people, enduring sexual abuse, or, that the the space holder, that would be the worst case scenario, is like too heavy handed in like their own ego and like worldview, and they impose that on the person. But you're touching on something that I actually wanted to get to, which is, you're talking about, should people be dosing, should the space holder be dosing with the participant? But also, the more general question is like, should space holders in general have done a lot of their own psychedelic work to really be familiar with that terrain? And so you talked about your own hermitage, I think, with psilocybin. So you said 40 days or something. So if you could just describe what that was like, go into it. What were the protocols? What came out of it? Like, what were you going through? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's tough to think about how somebody might work with somebody without having experience already with this. It's difficult. Not to say that it's not possible. Therapeutic trip sitters, can be responsible and helpful and keep a person safe for sure, without ever experiencing a psychedelic. But at the same time, to be the most helpful, it really is valuable to have the experience yourself. But when I talk about doing the work, there's lots of ways that you can do the work without necessarily needing the psychedelics. Like you can work on your own stuff in your own ways. For me, yeah, it was actually, and this is funny, it was 2019, the MAPS conference. I had heard Joe Tafer was talking about the dragons in the DNA. The woman that had the migraines, and that he was doing ayahuasca with her, and he was watching the dragons swimming around in her DNA, and he realized that you could sing to them, and when you sang to them, you could dissolve the dragons, and then the migraine went away. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I want to sing to the dragons. I want to learn to sing to the dragons. But then I remember being on the plane coming back from the conference, and I was like, how do I learn how to sing to the dragons? And I was like, do I go to South America? Like, do I learn from some tribal, medicine men how to sing for the dragons? Like, that just, for me, that just didn't feel right. Like, that's not my culture. That's not my tribe. And my mystical practices were really kind of solid in where they were. And so it was like, I think in meditating about it, it was like, I need to do this sort of the shamanic way, but I need to do it by the mushrooms way. They need to teach me this. I don't necessarily learn this from another human being, how to sing to the dragons. So yeah, that's when I decided. I think it was a month later that I went into hermitage, and it was it was isolated cabin. And I didn't really bring much with me at all because I didn't want to be distracted. I ate nothing but rice and quinoa, which I wouldn't recommend. I would change that part of it. That's the only part of it I would change. The food was, that was difficult. But yeah, beyond that, what I would do is I really structured it around the moon phases, because I wasn't using clocks. I wasn't even using electricity. So
did you have a phone, or you like did away with that?
Nothing.
For 40 days, you went without your phone. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Nothing. I wasn't even using electricity. Mm-hmm. So moon phases, I was really focused on the moon phases, right? And so as a mystic, there's symbolic aspects of the moon, right? So each moon phase, I was really focusing on a certain aspect of my therapeutic and spiritual journey, in my journaling, in my focus. I was also moving through the Fool's Journey with the tarot cards, and focusing on each one on daily basis, and like focusing on different things on like a weekly basis with like the Tree of Life path working. I had very specific things that I wanted to do meditations wise around different things that were part of my mystical and spiritual practices, and that was journaling. I also brought my ukulele, right, for music. I had a metronome so that I could have a beat, and I had bells for my ankles so that I could dance and have music at the same time. And really, like, that was it. Tuning forks, yoga, that was my life for 40 days. Morning, wake up, journaling my thoughts, my dreams. Obviously, that was a big part. First thing, journaling as much as I could about my dreams. A lot came from my dreams. And then I would just journal until I didn't have anything left to say. I would focus on the different things I was going to focus on meditation wise. Yeah, yoga, tuning forks, music, and then just sitting with them doing nothing. I think that was probably the most difficult challenge. Was I always felt like I wanted to be doing more than I was doing. And yet sometimes I would just find myself sitting and staring out a window for hours and hours and hours. And this was not on mushrooms, just because I had nothing really else to do. So I just sat and stared. But yeah, it's amazing the things that you end up noticing, or the things that end up going through your mind when you don't have any distractions. And yeah, it was super transformative. It far exceeded my expectations, and my expectations were actually really high. You don't go into something like that if you don't have high expectations. Yeah, and it exceeded it.
Wow. And
all
so
sorts
what
of
was,
creative.
oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say there was all sorts of creative inspirations that came, all sorts of like therapeutic processing around my own like past traumas, and all sorts of things that made me feel like I had shifted and changed. I did experience ego death. I experienced like that sort of divine oneness. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, like I got all that experience. And yeah, then I felt really confident after that, and really comfortable in my relationship with the mushroom to be able to help other people and be there with them for their journeys.
And so what was the mushroom protocol also, like when you were doing it?
So I started off at half a gram. And then 3 days later, I did 3/4. And then 3 days later, up to 1. And then I just continued at that increment. And it was based around moon phases. I would take certain days off. There was a period that I did a full fast from everything. And so like that period of time. But yeah, I ended up dosing up to 4 grams. And the actual more profound experience that I had was on a lower dose, believe it or not.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, I've found that lower doses can be actually sometimes more difficult in a way, because you're still connected enough to like regular reality, but you have your one foot in the more mushroom reality. And if you're not familiar with like towing that line and that balance, it can be like, where are you in it? But also way more transformative, because you're getting to like apply the mushroom state to the regular reality state, like while you're in the experience, rather than, tripping, like going off very far and then coming back several hours later. I don't know, that's for me, that liminal space is what it's been like, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting how dose works with this, because it's like where it is exactly for any given person could be very different. And yeah, I've seen it where it can be really, really valuable for people to have kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out in a way, because they're able to take it and sort of do a lot of integration right there in the moment. There's a lot more talk involved with that type of journeying, and just like process in the moment of what's being experienced. And then I've seen it where sort of the like highest, right, where people experience like that total ego death, and they're just like kind of gone for a while and just exploring whatever it is that they're personally exploring. And then I've seen it where people have gotten kind of like caught in the cuff, like caught in the middle, where it's like you could tell that they were trying to like experience that ego death, like they're trying to like dissolve into this, but feeling like they were stuck in a way. And yeah, I've seen that as being a really difficult experience for a person, where it's like I knew that they were like right at that edge, but something was preventing them or blocking them from doing it, which was difficult.
And so after this experience, like what was the main shift that you saw in yourself? Like, this before and after, or like how was it integrated, and what changes did it really enable you to make?
That's interesting, because there's so many pieces of it that were so profound in the moment, like when I was experiencing them, as well as right after, like I had to go and tell everybody I knew, like all these really profound insights that everyone who had known me in the past and like known the things that I struggled with and just knew me personally, I had to like go and like share all these things with people about what I learned and what I experienced and what I dreamed and like the visions that I had and all of this stuff. But in hindsight, like it's some of the things that only came much later, like even years later, that were the most valuable. And again, it's about that sense of where was my ego then versus where is my ego now. And so like back then, there was a lot of really like excitement around these creative inspirations that I was getting. And I was like, oh, wow, this is gonna be great for my career. Like I can go and do this and I can do that and I can start this up. And I think I learned in time that it wasn't necessarily about that, and it's not about making my name for myself or like, doing all of that. But in the moment, like it was super cool to have all of those ideas. And I think maybe there was value to me having that then. But yeah, so I realize now in hindsight that there was other aspects to the dreams that I was having that maybe hadn't even taken place yet, that I was getting maybe foresight about things that were yet to come, that were going to show me that I still hadn't got it yet. And so, yeah, it was like the 40 days gave me the relationship with the mushroom, but it didn't necessarily cure me of everything that I struggled with as a human. But it definitely gave me all sorts of insight that continued to deliver even over time. So the difference between even, before the journey and after, yes, healing, profound healing of all sorts of things that I've been holding on to, letting go of all sorts of things. But then, yeah, even from then till now, the insights that journey gave me have led to more of that, just being less of me and more of in alignment with that collective all and what I can do to best contribute.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also leads into my next question, which is that, I feel like, I've heard it said, and people have said often, like psychedelics make you more you, right? And like, it's never really about like sitting there and like pontificating that you're on a substance, but actually like, how can you be more fully realized as a person? And so when I was reading your bio and also just a little bit that you told me before we did this interview, was you are doing such cool things and I wanted to ask you about them. And the three that stood out to me were, number one, if you could just talk about Saba Cooperative and what the gist is behind that. And then the second two were like, what does it mean to be a solar punk? And you talked again about the nomadic, nomadic life and permaculture. And so I just, we can go piecemeal, but I just wanted to lay those out as a few talking points.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess we can talk a little bit about eco-psychology, which is this idea that we are going to thrive when we are in alignment and in harmony with nature, and that we as human beings are not just isolated in our humanity. We are, in an energetic way connected to our ecosystems. And so thinking about that, it becomes really important to consider all the ways that we are interacting with our world. And obviously, there's all kinds of concerns, right, about how our behaviors have been impacting our planet and how they're going to continue to impact our planet if we don't drastically change how we've been doing things. So solarpunk is an ideology that came out of sci-fi, and it's actually the contrast to cyberpunk. So cyberpunk being that dystopian reality of the dystopian future where technology takes over and, like does horrible things and, everything's horrible. Whereas solarpunk, in contrast, is we responsibly use technology and we use it to do good things for the earth and do good things for each other. And we are living in ways that are ecologically sustainable and in ways that are socially sustainable. So solarpunk isn't just about green living, but it's also about moving away from that crony capitalist way of being and really focusing on egalitarian decision-making structures, social equity, really localized community, like all of that. So Saba Cooperative was really based around trying to incubate and nurture that. And we started in 2012, so a little over 10 years in New Hampshire, a bunch of people that were involved with the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is a community of people that are trying to create alternative designs and structures around community and just social support. And so we started incubating intentional communities in New Hampshire, and that is around sort of that permaculture ideology, right? Using the natural patterns that exist to try to create alternative forms of agriculture that are actually more sustainable and more just harmonious with the earth. So
and by intentional community, you mean people who are like living in these places, right? Like home, like cooperative homes?
Yeah, I mean, people used to call them communes, right? Like it's that idea, right, of a group of people all coming together to share resources, to support one another, to act as a community together, which seems kind of foreign, but it used to be the way things were done. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's happening so often now. And it's, I think, leading to a lot of the problems in society. I think there's it's called relational cultural theory, right? That idea that we thrive when we're connected to each other, but yet most of us are living in chronic isolation. So it's not a surprise that so many people are sick. And so, yeah, the idea with that is not just creating these physical spaces that are going to be sort of nutritious to the local community, but also, yeah, the opportunity for people to come together and support each other and create these supportive environments, which is, yeah. So we did that in 2012, and there was a number of years we were incubating communities in New Hampshire, but then the people that were involved kind of went their separate ways and were doing different projects. I was doing my therapeutic, my outpatient program, my halfway houses. But yeah, then COVID happened. And I had been doing retreats. I'd been traveling all around, doing private retreats up before that. And once COVID happened, there weren't really any people scheduling retreats at that point. So it was like, well, what? Like, what am I supposed to do now? You know, like how do I continue to live in alignment with my mission in sort of this new world or wherever we're heading? And I just so happened to have something come through my social media where it was another group that were doing something similar or trying to do something similar, you know, like community incubation with the nomadic aspect of also having sort of these nomadic tribes that travel around and also connect these communities with resources, and loved the idea and connected with other people through that also were aligned with the mission, and decided that we actually wanted to reform Saba. So that's what we did. And it was just about a year ago now that we reformed. And I've got a great team of people that joined me that have been so helpful in just making it happen so fast. So we now have 3 incubated communities in the US. We have land in New Mexico. I guess that's not an incubated community yet, it's just land. We have what we're starting up in Oregon, and as well as what's currently a makerspace in Oregon. It's like an artist studio makerspace. And then we also just got connected with a community in Massachusetts, which has a small established farm there as well. Farm, gardens and things. So yeah, and what I've been doing a lot of is actually the storytelling. Solarpunk is really aligned with storytelling and really creating that imagery of what it could look like to live in this sort of beautiful future, especially when we're all kind of sitting in this, oh no, you know, like everything is so awful and can't really foresee it changing so much. To be able to actually storytell what these communities look like if all of a sudden everybody's thriving and everyone's using alternative energy and there's food growing all over the place, so nobody's stressed out about that. And yeah, so I've been using storytelling and poetry and really like cool imagery to help people think of what these futures could look like. And it's getting a lot of attention. The solar punk thing is really envisioning what the world could look like if we were doing things better. And the more I do that, I think the more people are getting drawn to it. They're seeing in social media all the dark, difficult, stressful things. And then all of a sudden they see a Saba post and it's, this utopian vision of what the world could look like. And I think maybe it's giving people some hope that not only is it possible, but that there's people actively working towards it, and that they can join in too.
Wow, it's really like such a dream hearing all of this. When I was in college at UC Berkeley, I lived in a co-op, and that really kind of opened me up to the whole ethos of, communal living, cooperative living. I've done like research on the Back to the Land movement up in Northern California and I guess into Oregon and so forth. And for me, like, especially after I kind of discovered rainbow gathering as well, I don't know if you're, I kind of get that vibe a little bit.
Yeah.
It takes one to know one, I guess. It feels like the practical expression of the psychedelic ethos. And so much of like intentional living and living off the land and in alignment with nature is like what, the ideal image or action point of like, you had a psychedelic experience, now what? And that kind of feels to me like taking action as integration. And, it's a life inspired by psychedelics in a way that like, it doesn't render the psychedelic experience unnecessary, but it sort of like helps us refine, how we can use these medicines, not just to like wake up to be like, okay, now I need to like live more harmoniously with nature, but how can I go deeper in myself now that these basic, points of nourishment, soulful, spiritual, physical, etc., are being met in these types of paradigms. I mean, at least that's how I see it, and pray for it to see more of it. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting thing when it comes to the idea of integration, because I think there's a lot of people that will focus on integration when it comes to the personal experience of integration, right? Where we want to integrate into our lives the things that we've learned about our personal journeys so that we can get better. But then there is that extra aspect of how do you integrate what you're learning and journeying into the world as a whole to actually take what the mushrooms are inspiring, because it seems like they're inspiring the same thing for all of us uniquely, right? Like it's still the same drive that they're giving just through all sorts of individual experiences. And it really is. It's this drive to create a world that's just better, in all the ways that we could be doing better. On a personal level, on a societal level, the mushroom in particular in its experience often is very much about getting us motivated towards that. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned rainbow, because I think a lot of Saba was inspired by the rainbow kitchens, like the ways that they're sort of uniquely governed, they have their own little unique cultures, but open and welcoming to the cross collaboration of everyone. Like it's like you don't have to be a member, of each kitchen to go and partake in what they have going on. And yeah, same thing with our incubated communities, everything having their own unique culture, but yet cross, seeding and cross pollinating each other and allowing opportunity to be open to share. Without expectation, just in negotiation, right? So that idea that, you go to a rainbow kitchen, they'll, offer you food, if you got a bowl and a spoon, they'll give you food. But when they go yelling, we need wood for the fire, get up and go get some wood. It's sort of the same thing when it comes to the incubation of our communities, where it's like you're going in without an expectation that you owe anyone to be there, and you'll be able to partake in the things that other people have access to, but you're going to come up with negotiations around how you're going to also assist and contribute, or the community is probably not going to welcome you.
Right. Rainbow. I mean, I think rainbow is a psychedelic experience by itself. It's such a paradigm shift, and being in a place where there's no money technically. I mean, granted, it takes money to like build the kitchens, and so I say there's no money, but I guess it's behind the scenes. Like somebody is resourcing, like getting the food, all of that stuff. But I mean, it's changed my life. Like it really, my first rainbow, like completely changed the way I experienced myself and nature and society and religion and all of these different things. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt the same way actually. To walk into an environment, where, there's, at least 1,000 people, and to walk around and everyone's like, "Hey, brother," like, "Hey, sister, loving you," like, wow. Or yeah, like being at the campfire and just hearing, like a group of like 30 people just yell out, "Loving you," like I want to live there, like I want to live in that space where everybody is just like, not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And nobody's expecting anybody to be perfect, but that genuinely there is this openness to care and compassion for each other. And yeah, being in that environment surrounded with those people. And there's something about the psychedelic that gets us to that place.
Yeah,
right? Just collectively.
Psychedelically informed. It's so part of the culture, but it's not even about it, like that's, I think, what it, the promise of rainbow, the same way alcohol is, and, is so integrated into our culture. Like no one's like making a big deal out of it. And I'm not saying it's a culture informed by alcohol, but it's just like the same way at rainbow, like mushrooms or acid, or, it's like it's a given, but it's also beyond it. I think Ken Kesey talked about this, where, there's this like revolving door of like, you get high and you come down and, it's like, how do you go further? Right. And I know when they kind of, a few weeks ago, I interviewed Mountain Girl. She was one of the Merry Pranksters, Carolyn Garcia. And, I asked her about the acid test graduations, and it was just kind of like these parties, but what does it actually mean to like graduate from acid, or like to graduate to another level of psychedelic consciousness, and what do you do with your life thereafter? Is, I don't know, something to think about. And I see it in cooperative living, intentional living, permaculture, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I think there's a few pieces of it. Like, as you're talking, it's making me think about, often for people that have done some really intense journeying, that we don't necessarily feel so compelled to use the psychedelics so much later on. It's like, unlike other substances where people just like feel like they want to keep using them because they're fun. And not to say that it can't be enjoyable and pleasant to do it, but that it just doesn't feel so necessary anymore. Like once it's done its work, like it's done its work, and that it's with you, too. Like the mushroom never fully leaves once it comes. And yeah, I think I reach points in life where I feel like I need to do it again, because there's something that's going on in my life I feel like I need to work on, or I would value some insights, or I'm just feeling like emotionally wonky in some sort of way, and like I can benefit from it. But beyond that, it's not like I feel like, oh, I can't wait till my next journey or something. Like, no, because I feel like I have lots of tools that are available to me. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, like this post psychedelic experience, is realizing that you don't necessarily need any specific tools. It's part of your journey to be in alignment with this, even if you're not in some sort of like impaired state.
Exactly.
And yeah, then beyond that, okay, so what do you do with that when you have all sorts of resources and you don't need to go into any psychedelic journey to actually accomplish this? Then it becomes, yeah, what's the plan? And that's where we start. Okay, how do we change the world now?
Right, exactly. And I see Ram Dass's journey as like kind of a step in that, like he also, kind of stepped off the psychedelic merry-go-round. I mean, granted, like he never really officially stopped tripping, but, be here now, and like the integration of that ethos, I'd say was his own psychedelic integration that he kind of gifted to the world. And I grew up in the Ram Dass community, and I grew up with Be Here Now as like, is the closest thing to like a Bible that my family used. I mean, we grew up Jewish, but To Be Here Now is definitely more central as a text in my childhood. And, but I was always frustrated with it too, because I was like, be here now, like this is not a here or a now that I want to be in all the time. And so sometimes it's like, this is like the rebellious teenager in me. Like, it's not enough to just be here now and just bypass the stuff that's making that difficult. But like, I think part of the active, like it's not just a passive presence, but like an active, like change the here, change the now, change the elements of it to make it easier to be here now.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think that the reason we go to these, right, like other places, well, not going to any other place, but whether it's in our mind state, going to these other places, is so that we can take that back into the now, to be here now, and manifest accordingly. So that's a great point.
Yeah, these other realms. I mean, it's the same way you would go to like on a trip to another place and bring back clothes and furniture and food items. It's, you get also these like spiritual place, these spiritual insights from a different realm. I mean, in Kabbalah, you have like the four worlds officially, right? Like there's, I mean, not everyone who's listening to this knows Kabbalah, but it's like talks about these four different worlds of consciousness or reality or whatever you want to call it that are very real places and that we don't always necessarily in mundane life get to dip into, but are always there, always existing and beyond time and space in a lot of ways. So anyways, I want to, ask you if there's anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to go over, discuss, or just, it's every journalist's last question pretty much.
Yeah, no, I think that we've talked about so much. And I just want to talk about the Micro Method program. I think that's the big thing that I'm focusing on right now, just because it's so exciting. It's so new. And to be sort of one of the first involved with the licensed use of this, I feel so blessed and privileged to be involved with this, especially when I didn't expect it. So I'm just wanting to bring people's attention to the fact that we have this going on. We have open enrollment at this point. So if anybody is interested in joining our program, becoming a facilitator, there's lots of opportunities either with us or in the state of Oregon. So
how can people get in touch with you, learn about what you're doing, that's Saba Co-op, about Micro Method, just, all of that kind of out there in the world on the internet information?
Yeah, the simplest way for Saba Co-op is sabacooperative.com. And Micro Method is micro-method.com. So either one of those websites, you'll be able to get all the information, all the links to all our social media is all through the websites.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for reaching out and for being on the podcast. I'd really say this is one of the most inspiring conversations I've had in a while. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.